I stood over the bodies of the four with whom I had so recently shared the wolf's power. Their faces were growing cold under the moonlight, their eyes reflecting a frozen bewilderment. They were too strong to die so quickly, but in that instant, I left them no chance. The beast within me could no longer bear their sympathy. They saw me waver when I felt a hint of inner weakness, and that was what doomed them. I felt the wolfish fury subside, replaced by exhaustion. My body still bore the traces of the struggle. Deep scratches across my ribs, a spot near my forearm where the skin had been bitten through. The pain throbbed, yet it felt distant. I exhaled sharply, then clenched my hands into fists, trying to regain control over myself. When I looked at them again, I realized their deaths were now irrevocable. In the past, if someone showed doubt or pity, I saw it as a potential flaw in the pack. But never before had I unleashed my beast with such ferocity. I despised myself, and even more so their involuntary compassion, which they had dared to show upon noticing my moment of hesitation. I tried to remain in my wolf form, but it was as though my pelt was losing its strength. I could feel I wouldn't be able to hold it for much longer. My bones ached, my legs trembled. I had to shift back to my human shape to keep from collapsing in exhaustion. It seemed to me that the beast within had temporarily withdrawn, but its traces still burned inside me, confirming I was still a monster. Leah lay close by. I remembered her gentle laughter. She could bring a kind of warmth even to our darkest journeys. Now her arms lay limply at her sides, and her lips had turned white. It seemed to me she was gazing straight into the heavens, though her eyes were unmoving. I touched her palm and felt only cold. I used to think I was indifferent to the deaths of others, but everything had changed now. I leaned closer and sensed a rising emptiness within. There were no words left for me to speak. I looked at the wounds on her body, noticing that one of my comrades must have tried to protect her. Now everyone lay dead. No one could help her or me. I stood upright, struggling not to lose my balance. My mind churned with memories of the days when death seemed a familiar companion. But losing Leah exposed a vulnerability in me that I had fought against for years. I realized that her death hurt me more deeply than any loss I'd known before. The emptiness I felt was terrifying. I recalled a secluded place deep in the woods, about half a mile from here. There was a stream, and on its bank grew yellow flowers. I used to go there when I wanted to shed the burden of the wolf's pelt. No one bothered me amid the thick trees and overgrown slopes. I decided I would carry Leah there, leave her in peace, and then finally assume my beast form so I would never return to human life. I bent down and with difficulty lifted her in my arms. She didn't weigh much, but my fatigue took its toll. I took a few steps. My legs shook, and every deep breath stabbed pain into my side. For the first few yards, I forced myself to keep my gaze ahead, refusing to look back at the fallen. Each time I tried to think of them, revulsion flared inside me. The forest greeted me with silence. Branches whipped against my face as I pushed through the low brush. I noted the tiniest scents of leaves and damp earth, but felt none of my usual curiosity. All of my focus was on not letting Leah's body slip from my arms. A cold wind blew, finding its way beneath my torn clothing. I barely reacted to it. The trees parted, and I emerged near a shallow stream. The water gurgled peacefully, as though unaware of the night's events. On its bank, yellow buds indeed swayed in bloom. I knelt down and carefully set Leah on the ground. Her hair touched the damp pebbles, and her hand remained pointed toward the sky. I brushed a lock from her face, noticing how lifeless her body had become. It felt as though I had no strength left even to grieve. I sat beside her, listening to the water, feeling the heaviness in my chest steadily grow. Once I would have laughed at such emotions, believing that pity was a weakness to be suppressed. But now it overwhelmed me, and I could not banish it. I touched her wrist. It was cold as stone. I closed my eyes, trying to find the slightest hint of calm. After a long silence, I decided I would remain here until morning. I would wait for the first rays of sunlight to break through the leaves and say my final farewell to her. Then I would become the wolf, move deeper into the forest, and cease to exist for humankind. Let the beast lead me to the edges of forests and abyssal cliffs, where I would dissolve into the darkness. Images of the recent fight surfaced in my mind, but I fought them off. I knew everything began with one brief moment. They saw the slightest hesitation in me, and I refused to let that become common knowledge in the pack. Their pity confirmed my worst fear, and the beast tore its way out. I couldn't stop, even when I realized I was killing those who had fought by my side. Now I was alone. 4 dead comrades and her, the only one whose loss I could not accept with indifference. I watched her pale face, understanding that there was no undoing this. The only thing left was to complete my farewell ritual. Leave her here, and then abandon my human form. Maybe as a wolf, I wouldn't feel the pain so acutely. I placed my hand on the damp earth, scooped up a handful of sand, and let it pour beside her lifeless hand. It felt as if I were trying to bind her to the earth, to the water, to the hushed whisper of the leaves. I leaned down and pressed my forehead against her cold shoulder. I didn't say a word. It seemed words would change nothing. I rose again, unsteady with fatigue. The wind blew more strongly, tugging at my torn clothes. I looked at Leah lying by the bank and felt something inside me let go of my ability to care about life. I walked to the water's edge, dipped my hands into the stream, and tried to wash the blood from my face. The stains did not fully disappear, leaving remnants of my recent madness on my skin. Then I turned back toward her. I thought I saw the yellow flowers sway more than usual for an instant, but it might have just been a gust of wind. I moved a few steps closer and sank down next to her body. I wanted to sleep, shutting out everything that had happened tonight. I hoped that when dawn broke through the foliage, I would have the strength to carry out my plan. I didn't know if I would ever forget her image, but I understood I could no longer live with this pain as a human. The sound of the stream and the cool air stirred memories of the start of my journey. For a long time, I was haunted by the realization that there had once been another life, where the 7 of us were bound by a common oath and possessed an almost invincible power. In those days, we were all young, merciless, and unaware of any limits. Our old names were erased, leaving only what the Master had given us. He called me Raven, and my comrades were Claw, Fang, One Ear, Fatso, Red, and Shadow. It all began with a simple deal made in a moment of hopelessness. I'd heard rumors of a mysterious power granting the ability to become a wolf, protecting its bearer from ordinary weapons and magic. People said this power had a master they called the Master. No one knew who he was or where he came from, but they whispered that he'd bound his own blood to ancient spirits. granting extraordinary might to those like us in exchange for our humanity. My body was dying by the side of a dusty road when my family had already been killed by dark sorcerers and by the diseases ravaging the villages. I could barely breathe, and passers-by kept their distance. It was then that the master found me and asked, "Are you prepared to do anything to go on living?" I answered fervently, for the thirst for vengeance and hatred of my own weakness outweighed my fear. The master heard me out and warned me of the harsh conditions ahead, a life with no room for pity or doubt. I declared I would accept them without hesitation, and I saw him squint in satisfaction. I remember cursing every trace of weakness in myself, cursing the moment I failed to save my loved ones. The master said he would take away my human trembling, replacing it with the cold strength of the wolf. He told me to close my eyes, and my consciousness faded. I awoke in a different form. A wolf's pelt fused with my body, my bones and muscles altered beyond recognition. I had to learn how to stand on all fours, trying not to fall over. The master proclaimed that if I ever tried to reclaim my former weakness, the beast within me would never forgive it. Then began a long period of training. The master led us through swamps, forests, and ruins, forcing us to battle bandits, royal soldiers, and sorcerers. Any show of mercy was punished. If someone softened, the master reminded us, weakness kills from within. No external blow can harm you if there are no cracks inside. Over time, our minds adapted to the beast's rage, and our bodies learned to withstand blows that would once have been fatal. Eventually, the other 6 appeared. Each had their own story. Claw lost his family in a massacre. Fang grew up an orphan among street criminals. One Ear was maimed in a skirmish with guards. Fatso survived a betrayal by his kin. Red fled from a sorceress who sought to enslave his soul. And Shadow spoke little about his past, but one day he too accepted the wolf's pelt. The master erased all their old names, bestowing new ones. I was called Raven because the master often sent his orders through a black bird that flew only to me. We trained together, learning not to fear arrows or steel blades. Our hides shielded us from severe wounds, and our regeneration protected us from magical fire. People whispered of a bloodthirsty band that could slip into fortified castles and emerge with hardly a scratch. They claimed our power was demonic in origin. I never heard any of us deny it. The master repeated that our true enemy lay not in outward weapons, but in hesitation within ourselves. He commanded us to surrender to our rage and trample all feelings except hatred. He gave us a goal. Give yourselves to the wolf, strangle all pity. Thus we learned to operate like soulless machines. Battle became routine, and death ceased to frighten us. The master called me Raven also because as soon as his bird arrived, I was the first to read its brief messages. Destroy, seize, retrieve the relic. The instructions were always simple. We set off to carry them out and then returned to the master for the next task. Each time we felt a grim satisfaction at the new bloodshed. No one cared about the reasons behind the orders. It was enough that we served a higher will that had given us impossible strength. The master's command was clear. Do not let one another weaken. If you see any doubt, destroy it on the spot. The outside world can't touch you if there are no cracks within. I heard him repeat this many times when we prepared for battle. We knew that anyone in the squad who wavered was doomed. The wolf's power would turn its back on us if we ever embraced mercy. So we followed a trail of blood, crushing any armies in our path, be they royal soldiers or criminal gangs. We knew our existence inspired terror. Many believed we were the undead or servants of demons. We didn't care about the rumors so long as we obeyed the Master's orders without question and kept hold of our wolfish might. Over time, each member of the squad grew comfortable in a new pelt. Our sense of smell sharpened, our vision grew keener, our movements became swifter. I once feared my own claws, but soon they felt natural. Teeth and claws became my familiar weapons. The wolf within demanded blood, and we fed it with our victims, staging brutal raids at the Master's command. Sometimes we guarded his lair from prying sorcerers or wiped out gangs that hindered his plans. From the outside, it might have seemed we were mad, devoid of shame or compassion. And so it was. The pelt swallowed our human doubts, fueling the beast's rage. Memories of former lives blurred, as if they belonged to someone long dead. Loyalty to his doctrine was all that mattered, which held that emotion was our greatest threat. Everything went smoothly. Waves of enemies fell, and the pack thrived. The Master smiled whenever he saw how unquestioningly we followed his orders. The death we dealt to others didn't concern us, because we believed we could not be killed. It's hard to convey how intoxicating it was to feel invincible and free of any moral restraints. At times I glanced at my comrades and saw that each of them was walking a path mirroring my own. We all shared the same essence. Suppress the human within. Let the wolf reign. The Master took pride in having united 7 of us into a single merciless force. He said that one day we would rule entire lands. Neither I nor the others cared much for such talk. The intoxicating taste of power, the roar of blood in our ears, and the joy of tearing apart our enemies without pity. Those were what truly mattered. After a series of victories and brutal raids came a time when the Master simply stopped appearing. The one who had always given us directions and demanded blood vanished without a trace, leaving no notes or messengers. At first we waited for his raven to bring new orders, but days went by, and the bird never came. The pack began to split into small groups, wandering aimlessly through forests and villages. No one knew in which direction to search for our Master. Outwardly, we still possessed our beastly power, but our reason to exist was slipping away. Without the Master, there was no set of rules, no clear path for our rage. Most of us had grown used to specific orders. Destroy, attack, take revenge. Now there were no orders. Awkward attempts to occupy ourselves with random battles followed. On a whim, we might burn down an inn or slaughter a merchant caravan. But constant, senseless bloodshed didn't bring much satisfaction. Rumors said royal wizards or a coalition of sorcerers had declared a hunt for the mysterious conjurer known as the Master. Perhaps he had fled far from these lands to avoid confronting the mightiest sorcerers. No one knew for sure. I saw the growing unease in each of my comrades, for everything that bound us together had disappeared. At first I tried to assume the role of leader. Claw urged me to lead the search for the Master, while Fang insisted on a daring raid on a duke's palace, hoping word of such an attack would lure our Master out of hiding. But we had no idea where to start. The world was vast, and the Master had endless ways of concealing himself. Ultimately, all our plans to find him went nowhere. Months passed, and still the Master did not reappear. During that time, tragedy befell Red. He couldn't stand idle for long, always eager to hunt and prove that nothing could harm a werewolf. One winter, we found ourselves on a snowy plateau. Red spotted a deer and took off in pursuit. The deer ran onto a frozen lake and deliberately began pounding its hooves trying to break the ice. Red refused to back down, certain his pelt would protect him from anything. The ice cracked with a thunderous sound, and both the beast and its pursuer plunged into the icy water. We rushed forward, trying to save our comrade, but the fissure spread too far, keeping us back. I watched as Red drowned without even managing to shift into a wolf. In that moment, I realized for the first time that the pelt did not guarantee safety from every danger. The shock was a heavy blow. The master had always told us no ordinary means could kill us, but Red was taken by thin ice, not by a sword. It shattered our certainty in our own invincibility. Anxiety took root among us. One ear muttered that we could fall prey to other random mishaps as well. Claw, furious, blamed Red for his own recklessness. Fang and Fatso were silent, sensing how our old convictions were crumbling. I tried to distract the pack, coming up with new bloody raids to keep us from sliding into total apathy. We burned villages and attacked caravans. Over time, it became clear that no one found the same satisfaction in these raids as before. There was no order or meaningful objective, and our total freedom had turned into a filthy, aimless existence. Sometimes I caught the beginnings of fear in my comrades' eyes. What if any of us could die just as ingloriously as Red? Inevitably, tensions rose. Claw muttered curses under his breath, raging that the master might have deceived us about immortality. Fang killed almost without pleasure, as if it were a routine chore. Shadow spent more and more time away, never saying where he went. One Ear stood there like a sorrowful statue, while Fatso ate and drank to excess, as though trying to forget. I could sense that the old bonds were weakening, threatening to tear the pack apart. I recalled how we used to crush entire squads, breaking the ranks of royal soldiers. Back then, we felt a surge of battle lust, but now we wandered aimlessly, committing small-scale slaughters. Whenever someone pleaded for mercy instead of the old viciousness, I felt only a cold emptiness inside. It was as if the fire that once fueled our cruelty had abruptly gone out. If the master appeared or sent a raven with orders, we would unite again in killing. But each evening, staring at the sky, we received no response. None of us would admit to our despair, yet we all knew that something irreparable had happened. Red's death was more than just the loss of one fighter. It was a clanging bell that shattered our myth of invincibility. Time passed. Winter came and went. The pack kept on looting, but our enthusiasm waned. People whispered that the werewolf marauders were losing their power. It felt as though the kingdom, or the mages, might seize this opportunity to strike us down. No one knew whether the master would be able to return or rekindle the spirit we once had. Inwardly, I feared that even he might no longer be able to restore our old sense of unity. Sometimes I sat by the fire, recalling how much blood we had spilled at his command, remembering the proud gleam in Red's eyes during our raids. Now he was gone. It dawned on me that the same fate could befall me if circumstances turned ill. Hatred for the world no longer kept the emptiness at bay. Spring promised fresh conflicts. Word spread through the villages that the mages were gathering forces to destroy the remaining werewolves. The pack sensed the coming storm, but without the master, we had no idea how to respond. Our disagreements were too deep, our weariness too great. An understanding grew within us that nothing lasts forever. Months after Red's death and our long inactivity, a ragged raven appeared in the sky. It cawed a few times, then landed on a nearby rock, dropping a scroll bearing the seal each of us knew so well. My heart jumped. The master had finally given us a sign. I gathered the remaining 5 of us in the half-collapsed ruins we called home. Claw, Fang, Fatso, Shadow, and One Ear circled around while I unrolled the yellowed parchment. It said the master was hiding from united sorcerers bent on destroying him and severing his bond with the spirits. He ordered us to keep our heads down and prepare for an important ritual. That letter was the first time I read that the wolf's pelt demanded an annual sacrifice to the ancient spirit. It stated that once a year, we had to kill the first person who set foot on the old road after midnight. If we failed to offer this blood before the day was up, the spirit would abandon us, and we would cease to be werewolves. So that was the real reason for our periodic craving for bloodshed. It wasn't just our beastly nature. It was part of the deal sustaining our pelt's power. The pack stirred. Even the sullen Fang perked up, realizing we had a clear purpose once more. Claw made a gleeful remark that we'd no longer have to fight just for empty thrills. Hope returned when we understood that the master hadn't abandoned us. He was simply forced into hiding by the allied sorcerers. Shadow stood aside, seeming unenthused about the upcoming sacrifices, but said nothing. Within a few days, we took positions near the old road. Dark clouds covered the moon, and a drizzling rain fell. Silence surrounded us as each listened intently for the approach of our accidental victim. Tense and counting the hours, we wondered whether we would find anyone in time. Suddenly, a scrawny wanderer in tattered clothing appeared on the road. He was moving slowly, leaning on a stick, as if he belonged nowhere. The moment he crossed the invisible boundary, Claw lunged and knocked him to the ground. The rest of us joined in. It ended in an instant, leaving our victim no time to scream. Blood stained the clay-like soil, and I felt a strange rush within me, as though an unseen hand had restored the wolf's power to its former height. Shadow stood apart, not going near the drifter. Fang wiped his blade on the dead man's rags, while Claw tossed the body under a tree to clear the road. We returned to camp in silence, but it was clear the ritual had worked. Our bond with the spirits was renewed, and our pelts felt as if they were binding to us once again. That very night, a second raven came, bringing another of the master's scrolls. This time it spoke of a rare book in the mage's possession. According to the master, the tome held secrets capable of shielding him from high-level sorcery. After Red's death and months of doing nothing, we needed a real task badly. Shadow just sighed when I announced we would leave immediately. Our target was in a mountain town with a large library. We traveled slowly, skirting guard posts. It was only a few miles, but the rugged mountain paths made the journey hard. Claw and Fang whispered to each other, relishing the idea of hacking through the guards. Fatso stomped heavily along as though dragging his feet, and One Ear listened to every rustle. Shadow walked at the rear, silent as ever. When we reached the town walls, we didn't bother with stealth. We launched a sudden assault. There were few guards, and they weren't expecting a raid. the small squad of defenders scattered at the sight of werewolves. One mage fired off a blinding spell, but our pelts shielded us from serious harm. We shifted into wolves, terrifying those who remained. Cries echoed under the library's vaulted ceilings, and books tumbled from the shelves as we searched for the right volume. Finally, Shadow, who had stayed in human form, found a black tome with a seal in a far corridor. He was clearly on edge, clutching the book to his chest. Creeping up behind him, I saw blood on his shoulder, though he seemed not to notice. So focused was he on holding what might be our key to salvation. While the others finished off the mages, Shadow stood aside. His grim silence gave me a strange feeling that he took no joy in our victory. We left the place ablaze, setting the shelves on fire to erase any trace of our presence. Fatso thrust a torch into place, and flames quickly engulfed the wooden racks. The screams of those trapped inside fell silent beneath the roar of the blaze. We slipped out before the smoke filled the hall. Shadow carried the book all the way back to our hideout, never letting it go. The rest of us were proud of our success. On the way, Fang muttered happily that the master would have a new toy to wage war against the sorcerers. When we opened the tome, we found incomprehensible symbols and diagrams resembling ancient magical circles. I assumed the master needed it to hide from the very sorcerers hunting him. A sense of satisfaction filled me. At last we were serving the master again, shedding blood for a higher will. Back at our shelter, I saw Shadow grow distant from the rest. When Fang tried joking or nudging him playfully, Shadow would just nod or walk off. Even Claw, who loved his mocking taunts, couldn't spark a reaction. At first, I chalked it up to fatigue, but my suspicions grew when Shadow stopped appearing at hunts. One day, I picked up his trail leading deeper into the forest, a place we rarely went. I followed it to a sunny clearing and saw him sitting on the grass holding a small puppy against his chest. The pup wagged its tail, licking Shadow's hand, a sight so at odds with our way of life that I didn't believe it at first. The master's words came to mind at once. No pity. Any show of feeling is poison to the pack. Yet Shadow stroked the pup gently, as if finding some peace in the simple act. After I took a few steps forward, the pup sensed another presence and let out a pitiful whimper. Shadow turned, looking at me with a sort of resigned dread. Without a word, I drew closer and brought my heavy boot down on the little creature. The crack of its bones sounded deafening. I believed that by doing so, I'd force Shadow to snap back to reality, to unleash the beast within. But he didn't even try to protect the puppy. He simply shifted into wolf form, let out a low growl, and fled into the woods. I stood there, staring at the bloodied ground and the tiny broken body. I returned to camp and recounted what had happened, sparing no details. Claw spat curses, Fang growled, and Fatso looked away. Everyone understood that Shadow had harbored the pup and touched the forbidden feeling the master called pity for the weak. We all knew he had broken our cardinal law and could never again meet our eyes without shame. Shadow never returned. Days passed, yet there was no sign of him. We tried a few times to track him down, but the forest was vast, and Shadow had always been the best at disappearing. A bitter realization settled over us. The pack was dwindling again, slipping further into the void. The weakness the master always warned about had found a crack even in the most cold-blooded among us. Now we were 5. A few months earlier we had lost Red to icy water, and now Shadow had abandoned us of his own will. I kept telling the others how critical it was not to let similar weaknesses in, but I could feel our unity fracturing inside. We stayed together only out of fear of the Master and the knowledge that without the ritual, we'd lose our beastly power. Even so, after Shadow's departure, our raids continued, but they felt different. Each battle was more like a duty than the ravenous hunts of the past. I'd come back to the hideout with blood on my hands, a growing weariness inside me. The wolf still snarled, still demanded new victims, but some part of me craved something else. A vague longing pulled me toward ordinary people and the simple warmth I had long forgotten. That was when I discovered a small village a few miles from our hideout. I went there at twilight to keep from being seen, hiding behind old fences or in the thickets near the outermost house. I just watched as the peasants bustled about their yards, chatting, fetching water from the well. None of them suspected a werewolf was watching, barely breathing. Among these people, I noticed a young woman named Leah. She lived in a house on the forest's edge, often bringing geese onto the grass, carrying water from the well, humming cheerful little tunes. For some reason, her presence drew my eyes, compelling me to stay hidden so I wouldn't miss a single movement. Sometimes Leah would laugh as she scattered grain for her birds, and the simple sound of her voice stirred a strange sense of calm within me. I asked myself why I kept returning there. I could stand at a distance, watching her until the dusk grew too thick. I saw her hauling buckets, chatting with her mother by the door, or sitting with her father on the low fence. She sang softly, with a quiet serenity that stilled everything inside me. It was a piercing reminder that somewhere close by, there existed a normal life. I didn't understand why Leah in particular brought me such peace. Each time I returned to the hideout, I felt torn. The wolf in me still demanded blood, yet there was another part of me that clung hungrily to the memory of her smile. I tried to ensure none of my comrades noticed. I feared they'd sense this new weakness. The Master had made it clear that any attachment to ordinary people was madness, and being attached to a single girl could well be a mortal sin for a werewolf. Still, I couldn't resist going back time and again to the edge of that village. Sometimes, after a hunt that ended with our victims lying in the dirt and my adrenaline still roaring, my feet simply carried me to the place where Leah fed her birds and smiled. I watched this peaceful life and marveled at how people without magic or beastly strength could live so calmly. Deep down, I started to wonder whether such existence might be stronger than the will of the wolf. My squad knew nothing of my wanderings. I kept it secret, aware of how they would react. Claw and Fang would either mock me or sniff out the rustic charm and put an end to it. Fatso and One Ear had become indifferent after our losses. The Master was absent, and so I had only to guard myself from unwanted suspicion. But with each visit, my perspective on life changed. I felt a conflict in my chest. The wolf wanted blood. The man in me yearned for just a spark of the light I found in Leah's presence. Whenever I watched her, I remembered that once, long ago, I had a human family. That memory seemed like a dream from a life that no longer felt like mine. Yet it still unsettled me. I was disturbed at how badly I wanted to see something familiar in her, something I had lost so many years ago. Still, I returned to the hideout wearing my mask of indifference. The days passed, and the squad kept up its bloody raids, as though trying to fill our inner emptiness. but my thoughts revolved only around finding some excuse to slip away to the edge of that forest again, if only to glimpse Leah from a distance. All the while, I knew if anyone found out, the consequences would be grim. Nearly a year went by. Shadow never reappeared, and no one knew whether he was still alive. That left 5 of us. Me, Claw, Fang, Fatso, and One Ear. The time was approaching for the wolf's pelt to demand another sacrifice to the ancient spirit. The master still hadn't shown himself, but the ritual remained. We all knew this yearly sacrifice was vital. Without it, the pelt would begin to fade, and our wolfish fury would ebb. We gathered around the fire, agreeing to wait on the old road after midnight. The spirit will bring us whoever we must kill, Claw reminded us. Fang nodded, One Ear scowled darkly, and Fatso let out a tired sigh. Night fell, and we took positions among the brush lining the dusty road. A dead tree near the bend served as our landmark for the boundary. I crouched a bit off to the side, eyes fixed on the empty track. With every hour, the tension mounted. Part of me was afraid no one would come. We had to trust that the ancient spirit would do its part. Time ticked by, but the road remained silent. No merchants, no wanderers, no soldiers. A breeze rustled the branches, and now and then we heard the calls of night birds. Fang paced, impatiently growling, and Claw cursed under his breath. Fatso started nodding off, while One Ear sat still as a statue. I recalled the master's words. The spirit always delivers the intended victim before the end of the appointed time. But where was that victim? Dawn was approaching. A cold sweat broke out on my skin as I realized that if the night passed without someone crossing our path, we would lose our wolf power. We were too dependent on the ritual. The pack began whispering among themselves, guessing that the sacrifice might have taken a different road or died before reaching us. I forced myself to stay put, trying not to reveal any hint of doubt. Suddenly, I heard a human scream in the darkness. Someone was running, sobbing loudly, and tripping over the uneven ground. I strained my eyes and saw a woman's figure tearing down the road as if she were fleeing an invisible threat. My heart nearly stopped when I realized it was Leah. She had no business being here. Why? The next moments were a blur of confusion. Leah ran straight toward that damned tree, screaming for help. Reaching the boundary where the pack lay in wait, she stopped, breathing hard and glancing around. My heart pounded. Why is she here? I wanted to ask aloud, but I just stared in disbelief. Behind me, I heard my comrades growl in anxious anticipation. They were expecting whoever crossed the line to become our prey. Yet there stood Leah, alive and terrified. The pack remained hidden in the bushes, waiting to see what I would do. Leah was frightened, her clothes smeared with dust. She reeked of fear, yet there was a resigned gleam in her eyes, as if she had no idea where she'd ended up. I emerged from the brush in human form, stopping the others from attacking her. Struggling to stay in my human skin, I spoke quietly. "What are you doing here?" I heard my own voice ask, though in my head the answer had already sounded. She began explaining haltingly that she'd been traveling at night with a kind gentleman, hoping to help his wife and child. Along the way, they met a wanderer, and then a wolf attacked them, killing the man and scaring her so badly that she fled. In her panic, she veered onto the old road, not realizing where she was. Confused, I asked if the wanderer had been ahead of her. I heard her stumble over the word yes and felt my throat tighten. So the spirit must have marked that wanderer, but some wolf, or perhaps a werewolf, had killed him first. Leah had ended up here by accident, taking the place of the true intended victim. My brothers behind me must have seen my hesitation. None of them attacked Leah, because they were waiting on me. I was the leader, and it fell to me to decide if we would accept her as the next sacrifice. I looked at this terrified girl, shuddering at the thought that the ritual demanded blood. Yet she wasn't the victim chosen by the spirit. She just stumbled here while fleeing an unknown wolf. My legs felt weak, my heart hammered. I sensed I was ready to break the ritual's rule rather than hurt her, but I also knew my packmates were watching, wondering if I would falter. My mind buzzed with a single fact. If we fail the sacrifice, the spirit will abandon us, and we'll lose the wolf's power. The thought of living without my pelt, reduced to an ordinary human, terrified me. Equally terrifying was the realization that if the wolf was lost, it would be my end as well. Leah looked at me, something like recognition flickering in her eyes, though she couldn't have truly known I'd once watched her from the edge of the village. I wanted to yell at her to run, but I knew it was too late. Reluctantly, I glanced over at the bushes where my comrades waited. Claw, Fang, Fatso, One Ear, each ready to pounce, still hesitating only out of deference to me. Leah saw my humanity, while the pack saw that I wasn't baring my wolf's teeth at her. Helplessness flooded my mind. If I tried to save Leah, I would betray the ritual. If I killed her, I would destroy the part of me that had suddenly yearned for something resembling an ordinary human life. In the blink of an eye, I realized there was no way out. Leah didn't deserve to die, but the spirit demanded a sacrifice, and my brothers wouldn't tolerate any doubt. I mumbled something incoherent. Tears glistened on her face as she begged for help, not realizing the gods had cast her in a tragic role. Overwhelmed by a burst of fear for my own power and status, I yanked out my dagger. I hoped it would end her suffering swiftly, with no chance for her to scream or plead. My insides lurched as I realized what I was doing. The blade slid into her flesh with horrifying ease, robbing her of even a single cry. She gave a choking gasp and collapsed onto the dry ground. Her gaze froze on the sky as the life left her body. My heart felt like it would burst from my chest as I grasped what had happened. She hadn't been the spirit's chosen victim. The true wanderer had apparently died beforehand. Leah's life was taken by my sudden desperate urge to keep the wolf's power. A few seconds passed before I heard rustling behind me. I stood there, transfixed by a pain that felt endless, yet not physical but tearing at my soul. Suddenly, I noticed a faint motion in the undergrowth. A wolf's silhouette watching us. In an instant, it disappeared into the shadows. A thought flashed through my mind that it might have been Shadow leading Leah to the road, or someone else who had eliminated the real sacrifice and lured this innocent girl to her death. I had no strength left to think about it. My hands trembled at the horror of what I'd done. I turned to see my comrades emerging from their hiding places. All four wore expressions of sorrowful reproach, with no trace of triumph or savage delight, only regret and a strange sympathy that made me want to scream. I realized they had long known about my visits to the village, had smelled the trace of another life clinging to me. They understood that this girl was the one who drew me in, and they had watched me kill her out of fear of losing my power. I took a step back, my stomach twisting. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I hissed, barely recognizing my own voice. Their eyes revealed pity. To me, pity was the worst kind of poison. I would never forgive their acceptance of me as I was, weak in their eyes. Hate ignited in my chest. I understood everything. They were a living reminder that I had seen something in Leah contradicting the wolf's law. Their compassion confirmed my mistake. And the master had always warned. There is no room for compassion in the pack. The pelt would forsake us if we let pity grow. These four stood there, gazing at me like a wounded animal, not condemning me, but pitying me. It filled me with a terrible revulsion. I couldn't bear that look. Rage flared inside me, the wolf awakening once more, demanding blood. I lunged forward, shifting into the beast. In a single heartbeat, muscles contorted and joints cracked. Baring my fangs, I clamped them onto Claw, who was closest. He hadn't expected such a swift attack. I tore a chunk of flesh from his arm, feeling the hot spatter of blood. A red haze smothered my senses. The others recovered, but I moved too fast. There was no way back for me now. Leah lay dead behind me, and they had seen me reveal my human side and show pity for her. Their pitiful gazes would haunt me at night. The only way to erase it was to kill them, so no one would remember my madness. Blood drenched the dusty road as I ripped into Claw's arm. The blades he prided himself on slipped from his grip, and he groaned, trying to defend himself with his other hand. But I saw only scarlet haze. I leapt onto him, the wolf's frenzy shredding flesh and crushing bone. Fangs snarled nearby, shifting to his beast form. He lunged, jaws snapping. A powerful strike knocked me off Claw, dragging me several yards away. I rolled across the ground and sprang back to my feet, feeling the pelt pulse with manic strength. A savage bloodlust seared my throat. Fang charged, raking my flank with his claws, and I answered with a vicious snap to his neck. I heard him choke, felt his body thrash in my grip. My rage granted me monstrous strength, and Fang collapsed, bleeding out. One Ear and Fatso attacked from both sides. They knew I was out of my mind, but still relied on our shared combat experience. I saw One Ear draw a small axe, Fatso a rough iron club. Without hesitation, I hurled myself at them. My muscles burned, my own claws digging into my palms, Fang's blood dripping from my muzzle as I turned to face them. One Ear was the first to strike. His axe skimmed my flank, leaving a deep gash. I roared with pain, feeling hot blood flow down my side. Twisting around, I raked his chest with my claws. A ragged groan told me I'd dealt a fatal wound. One Ear, grimacing in agony, tried to speak. "We didn't want..." But I didn't let him finish, ripping out his throat with a single slash. I spun toward Fatso. He drew a shuddering breath and swung his club. A thunderous crack exploded as it connected with my ribs. I howled, choking on blood, but still lunged forward. Fatso could withstand plenty of punishment, but my frenzy surpassed all reason. I seized his throat in my jaws, bearing down with my full weight, clamping my teeth until I heard the final grisly crunch. Hot blood sprayed over me, and after a few spasms he went limp. That left Claw, the one I had wounded at the start. He lay on the ground, trying to crawl away through his own blood. I saw him groping for his blades, clinging to life. I stumbled toward him, reeling from stabbing pain in my side and chest. His face contorted, not in fear but in anguished grief. He croaked, "Why did you, like..." And in my rage, I thrust my claws into his throat, silencing his question. His body jerked, then stilled, eyes wide with shock. Then I sank to all fours. dark drool running from my mouth. Pain pounded in my head, the adrenaline fading. My pelt was slick with blood from wounds inflicted by those who, until moments ago, had been my brothers. Summoning what little strength remained, I forced myself back to human form. My bones shifted, my skin throbbed with cuts, and my muscles trembled from exhaustion. When I opened my eyes, I saw the torn bodies of Claw, Fang, One Ear, and Fatso, lying in pools of blood. Their motionless faces lay beneath the morning mist. My throat felt tight with grief. Once we had fought side by side against hundreds of enemies. Now the 4 of them lay dead by my own claws. Slowly I lifted my gaze and saw Leah nearby. She lay a short distance away, the dagger still in her chest, unmoving and silent. The sight made me grind my teeth until they threatened to crack. I realized this was my punishment for the weakness I had been so terrified to reveal. Now I was alone, reeling, soaked in my own blood. I staggered over to her body. I touched her pale cheek, tears pouring from my eyes, mixing with sweat and blood. It was all over. The pack was gone. Leah was gone. My wounded body was barely holding together, and the wolf's pelt filled me with nothing but disgust. My eyes landed on yellow flowers poking up by the roadside, a wretched echo of that stream where I had once hoped to lay her to rest. That was when I realized what I must do. Carry her there. What reason was left for me to live? The wolf no longer wished to remain, and the man in me was broken by the bloodshed. Carefully, I lifted Leah's body, though my arms nearly failed me. With each step, blood oozed from my side, soaking my clothes, but I pushed on into the forest. In my mind, a voice whispered, "Once, you begged the Master to rid you of your weakness, yet you ended up destroying yourself even more." I cursed the fear that had paralyzed me. The wolf had only made my passions more dangerous and blind. I stumbled forward, confessing aloud, "The wolf isn't strength. It's just a way to flee from pain." Leah couldn't hear those words, but I repeated them softly anyway. "Forgive me. From now on, I would never again glorify the beast within me, a beast that only magnified my hidden frailty. All I could do was carry this through to the end. Bury her near the yellow flowers where, once upon a time, I'd sought a fleeting peace."